Hello, it's Stefan and Cassam here from HeyUGuys, and we have had the pleasure of seeing Ghostbusters, one of the most kind of talked about comedies of the year, well, films of the year in fact, and we have a difference of opinions because I quite like the movie and Cassam wasn't so keen.
I really didn't like it at all. It's one of the most toxic releases of the year. Not necessarily its fault, just everything around it, and it just has a vibe around it which isn't very welcoming for people to kind of get involved with it. So I'm glad it's out and then we can finally talk about it. But you did like it, I didn't, as you said.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you, what bits did you like?
Well, I found it to be very just pure kind of commitment to entertainment. I don't think it was trying to be anything it's not. I think it managed to separate itself from the original to a point where it felt quite unique of its own right. But then I do think when it did kind of implement the kind of the aspects of the original that we like, the kind of the logo, the slogan, the music, I felt it was done in quite an affectionate way. It was a bit contrived at times, but I think that this film stands alone of its own right and still marries itself with the original in a way that I think was done in quite a respectable way. It doesn't feel like it's treading on toes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I should say I hated all the characters in the film, every single one of them. And I also think it works as a comedy when it's not doing anything Ghostbusters related. Some of the gags are really good. Chris Hemsworth comes in and he plays this basically dumb nitwit for most of it. And all his jokes are dumb liners, as I like to call them. So they're just him being really thick. And they overplay that gag to the point where he becomes really dislikable. And people are saying he's the best thing in it. He's definitely not. But then none of the characters are great. I think Kate McKinnon is getting a lot of praise as well. She's really over the top, a really quirky sense of humour, which again starts to grate by the end of the film. Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig are playing the same characters they've played over and over again. Really good in the films that they've done in the past. They're great in Bridesmaids, but in this it just feels like it doesn't really sit together. And the absolute worst character, I think she's actually a good actress and a very good comedian, but Leslie Jones's character as the sassy one basically is really poorly handled. I mean,
What's wrong with her?
Well, you've got three.
She's really funny.
You've got three scientists, and she basically, they even say at one point, "Oh, we're the scientists, and you're you." Just completely taking her out, and it's quite obvious that the one black character in the film is the one who doesn't have a scientific background, and I think there's been a lot of controversy around that. I found it quite. I thought it was quite a big thing in the film.
I hadn't even put those two together. I mean, maybe you're right. I don't know. Maybe you might be reading into it, perhaps.
Well, then there's also the one Asian character in the film is also a delivery driver. So it's like, okay, there's something for me that didn't quite sit right.
Right. Well, I just think that because I think you didn't find it very funny. Is that the
Well,
problem?
In general, no. But there's bits in it that aren't related to Ghostbusters that are quite funny.
Because don't you think that there's no obligation for it to be a kind of laugh-a-minute film? Because in a similar vein to the original as well, there's such a strong story and it kind of borrows from the horror genre and there's almost this kind of action adventure. Do you think that it needs to be a kind of like, say if you went to see like Daddy's Home, Will Ferrell, Mark Wahlberg, you know you're going to go and you're seeing a comedy, and if it's not funny, it kind of falls flat. Sure. Whereas don't you think with this film that it doesn't need that scattergun approach to jokes? It can actually be relatively funny because I think it's got quite a strong story to back it up.
The story's fine. I mean, to be honest, the original story wasn't that groundbreaking. It has quite a normal, linear kind of these four people coming together. So you're right. I mean, I would say if you're not aiming to make a riotous comedy, then maybe don't cast full comedians.
Yeah, and Paul Feig does come into this with a big. That is true. But I quite like the characters. I agree that I think Kate McKinnon's character is slightly overrated at the moment. I think I found her to actually be the weakest joke-wise of the four. But I really like Leslie Jones. I thought she was really funny. And I think Melissa McCarthy, because she wasn't... When we've seen a lot of films with Melissa McCarthy in the lead role where it's all about her and she kind of steals the show, and I actually thought she took a bit of a back seat, which was kind of beneficial to the film.
Okay, one thing I did like is the friendship between Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy. That seems like a very pure relationship, and they kind of start off as not getting on, but they very quickly kind of form their old friendship that they've had for a while. So that was one of the things that worked. Special effects were fine.
Yeah. I like the look of it. I thought it was so colourful and vibrant. I like the fact that it felt like it had been moved into the kind of contemporary kind of cinematic environment using the kind of new technology and stuff. But it still had that quite cartoon-like aesthetic to the ghosts. They still felt quite kind of playful in the way, even though they were at times quite menacing. But I thought that they managed to, aesthetically, it felt like a Ghostbusters movie. I don't think it looked like a Ghostbusters movie. I didn't think it had that didn't you feel the tone and the kind of the spirit to it felt quite akin to the Ghostbusters franchise?
Not the franchise so much, because I'm not massively a big fan of the films so much as I am of the cartoon series, which is how I got into Ghostbusters. And when I got into it, I got really into it, to the point where I had all the posters, all the toys, and even did like some Ghostbusters on my own sort of thing. So yeah, but I think it does have a look that kind of lends itself to some of the earlier films. When it's scary, it is quite scary as well.
Oh yeah, no, it does get quite scary at times. No, but I mean, are you quite precious, do you think? Because there are some Ghostbusters fans that they're part of the reason why they're not into this movie, this reboot.
Yeah.
It's because they feel quite precious over this as a kind of franchise, it's something they grew up on, and they feel very kind of like they don't want to just. They feel like this is potentially, I don't know, kind of intruding in some way. But I mean, the original still exists.
It still exists.
It's not going anywhere.
And there is that wider discussion about how precious some people are towards it, because there's the obvious discussion about 4 females starring in roles that were made famous by 4 guys. But I mean, like I said, I took that out of it. I just approached it as a Ghostbusters movie. Any issues I have with a reboot, I have with any reboot. Like, it'll be ridiculous to say that we're always excited about any reboot, or that we normally say, oh, this reboot is going to be great, because the instant reaction to any film that is a remake or a reboot is it's not going to be very good.
Yeah.
That, regardless of who's in it or what the changes are, that's normally the way we approach it.
Yeah.
So I vaguely had that sense going into it, the same as I would for any reboot. I just found it not as consistently funny as I was hoping it would be, and not the Ghostbusters film that I wanted.
It is flawed. I mean, there are a lot of jokes that do misfire. I wouldn't say there wasn't a consistent stream of laughter, but I just felt that if you can separate this from the original and just treat it, if possible, I know it isn't easy, as a kind of standalone feature of its own right, I think there is quite a lot to admire about it. I don't think it's a bad film. I think sometimes you leave the cinema and go, that was a terrible piece of filmmaking. But I think this film had just enough entertainment value that I was able to leave and go, yeah, I was engaged with that movie when I left. I felt like I was involved in the story.
Okay, well, so that's Ghostbusters, which is out this week. We're going to talk about some of the spoilers in a separate video, so make sure you tune into that. And we're going to talk about, some of the things that really don't work for me in that as well.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey You Guys!